Good day, this is Sir Ace. So for today, we are going to talk about creative writing or malikaing pagsulat. The subject aims to develop practical and creative skills in reading and writing. It is also introduced the fundamental techniques of writing fiction, poetry, and drama, and discuss the use of techniques by well-known authors in a variety of genres. You will learn how to combine inspiration and revision and to develop a sense of form. So let us start with our subject for today, and that is creative writing or malikaing pagsulat.
So for today, we're going to talk about creative writing. So as you can see here, how creative writing has changed the world for the better. So for today, we're going to learn how creative writing has changed the world for the better. At this point, today we are talking about the first one, we have the introduction to creative writing. The second one is what is diction. The third one is the imagery and meaning. And the fourth one is the figure of speech. If we are going to define creative writing in one word, as you can see in the picture, the word is imagination. Why imagination? It's because creative writing, also known as the art of making things up, creative writing is a vital part of modern society, traditionally referred to as literature. Creative writing is an art of sorts, the art of making things up. It's writing done in a way that is not academic or technical but still attracts an audience. So always remember the difference between creative writing and at the same time the English for academic and professional purposes. Creative writing, through the definition, is rather loose. Creative writing can, for the most part, be considered any writing that is original and self-expressive. So always remember the word original and self-expressive when it comes in creative writing. And now, let's see the purpose of creative writing. The first purpose of creative writing is to both entertain and share human experience, like love or loss. So remember, the first purpose of creative writing is to both entertain and share human experience. The second one is a writer's attempt to get a truth about humanity through poetics and storytelling. So in creative writing, there is poetics and storytelling. The third one is if you'd like to try your hand at creative writing, just keep in mind that whether you are trying to express a feeling or thought, the first step is to use your imagination. So remember the word imagination for you to express your feeling or your thought. Now, the types of creative writing includes, the first one is we're going to talk about poetry also, plays, movie and television scripts, fictions like novels, novellas, and short stories, as well as the songs, speeches, memoirs, or the diaries, and at the same time, the personal essays. As you can see, some nonfiction types of writing can also be considered creative writing, like memoirs and personal essay, for example, can be written creatively to inform your readers about your life in an expressive way, and that is memoir and personal essay. Because these types are written in first person, it's easier for them to be creative. Now, the difference or the techniques used in creative writing includes, so the first techniques that we're going to use in creative writing is the anecdotes. The second one is the metaphors and similes. The third one is the figure of speech. The fourth is imaginative language. The fifth one is the emotional appeal. And the sixth is the heavy description. The seventh is character development. The eighth is the plot development. The ninth is the vivid setting. And the 10th is underlying theme. The 11th is point of view, and the last one is dialogue. Those are the techniques that we're just going to use in creative writing. Now, let's see the difference between technical writing versus creative writing. Now, if we're going to talk about technical writing, this is factual or more on reality. Technical writing is also informative, giving informations, and at the same time instructionals or giving instructions, or persuasive, you are entertaining people. Technical writing is also clear, precise, and straightforward. It also objective and specialize the vocabulary. Unlike with creative writing, this is more on fictional and imaginative. As I have said before, creative is more on imagination. And at the same time, entertaining, provocative, and captivating. Creative writing is more on artistic, figurative, symbolic, or even vague. And at the same time, creative writing is subjective. Why? This is more on yourself. And at the same time, creative writing is generalized vocabulary. And now for imaginative writing versus academic writing. We're going to see the difference between imaginative writing and academic writing. The first one is creative writing is different to academic writing. Why? It's because writing for websites is different to writing for newspaper columns. And at the same time, journal entries are different to writing press releases on behalf of a brand. While writing purposes do vary, it's important that when undertaking any writing, you have a firm grasp on this concept. Now, let's look at the fundamental differences between academic and creative writing. The first principal difference is the style is the chief difference between academic and creative writing. Next one, creative writing need not adhere or to any specific style parameters. Academic writing is different. Academic writing needs to be structured and executed adhering to a series of guidelines. Indeed, so stringent are these guidelines that academic institutions include these guidelines as part of their curriculum. Now, the overall, creative writing allows for more personal expression. So remember, creative writing, this is more on personal expression. Whereas academics, scholarly writing aims to explore an idea, argument, or concept. Academic writing requires more factual evidence for support and presents challenges such as the pressure of time. They each have their own purpose. And now let's talk about the sensory images or imagery. Sensory images or imagery is the writer's ability to create a gripping and memorable story has much to do with engaging our five senses. So as you can see in the picture, I can use sensory details in my writing. So one of the most important thing to do in writing is to engage our five senses. Sensory details includes sights, sound, touch, smell, and taste. Writers employ the five senses to engage a reader's interest. If you want your writing to jump off the page, then bring your reader into the world you are creating. When describing a past event, try and remember what you saw, heard, touched, smelt, and tasted, then incorporate that into your writing. Sensory details are used in any great stories, literary or not. Think about your favorite movie or video game. What type of sound and images are used? What do your favorite characters taste, smell, and touch? Without sensory details, stories would fail to come to life. And now, when sensory details are used, your readers can personally experience whatever you're trying to describe, reminding them of their own experiences and giving your writing a universal feel. A universal quality is conveyed when the writer is able to personally connect with the readers. Another note about sensory details. There is no one sense that's more important than another. It all depends on the scene you're trying to create. However, imagery, the sight sense, is a common feature in vivid writing. Now, let's look at the sensory details in action. So we're going to compare the two passages and describing a trip to grocery store. So this is the first passage. So let's see the first passage without sensory detail. Let's read the sentence. I went to the store and bought some flowers. Then I headed to the meat department. Later, I realized I forgot to buy bread. Now, does this pull you in? Of course, it doesn't. There's nothing to bring you into the writer's world. Now, so read this revised version with the addition of sensory details. So now, this sentence are now using sensory images. Let's see. Upon entering the grocery store, I headed directly for the flower department where I spotted yellow tulips. As I tenderly rested the tulips in my rusty shopping cart, I caught a whiff of minty dried eucalyptus. So I added the fragrant forest green bouquet of eucalyptus to my cart. While heading for the meat department, I smelled the stench of seafood, which made my appetite disappear. See how the extra details made that scene come to life, and that is sensory images or imagery. Writing with the senses is an important part of writing well. Adjectives bring writing to life and pull the reader into the text and help activate his or her imagination. Sensory details help the reader feel like he or she was there and create a more intimate connection to the narrator or writer and a greater understanding of the text. Adjectives help set mood and tone in the text and help establish a strong voice. And now, imagery is a language used by poets, novelists, and other writers to create images in the mind of the reader. Imagery includes figurative and metaphorical language to improve the reader's experience through their senses. Now, let's see the 6 sensory images. The first one is the sight, or we call it the visual. It appeals to the sense of seeing. Number 2, the sound or the auditory. It appeals to the sense of hearing. The third one is the smell or the olfactory, which appeals to the sense of smelling. The fourth one is the touch or the tactile, which appeals to the sense of feeling. The fifth one is the taste or the gustatory, which appeals to the sense of taste. And the sixth one is the motion, which appeals to the sense of seeing, except that the line contains another dimension or movement. As I have mentioned before, sensory images and imagery are the language used in creative writing. Now, imagery refers to the mental pictures that readers experience when reading literature. Imagery appeals directly to one or more of the 5 senses, and at the same time, an author achieves imagery through the use of words. Now, what image do you see in your mind when you read the following sentence? So let's read the sentence. A field of bright yellow flowers lay beautifully in front of me. Again, what image do you see in your mind when you read the following sentence? A field of bright yellow flowers lay beautifully in front of me. Is this image close to the one you saw in your mind? And that is imagery. Another example. What image do you see in your mind when you read the following sentence? The big, juicy burger with its melted cheese and red tomatoes made my mouth water and my stomach grumble. Again, what image do you see in your mind when you read the following sentence? The big, juicy burger with its melted cheese and red tomatoes made my mouth water and my stomach grumble. Is this image close to the one you saw in your mind? and that is sensory images or imagery. And now let's talk about diction. Hi, hello, sup, good day. Those are the examples of diction. Let's define first what is diction. Diction is the choice of words or the style used by an individual when speaking or writing. So always remember, diction is style used in speaking or writing, not just speaking, but as well as writing. There are several factors to consider when choosing words. Number one, words need to be right and accurate, and that is diction. And when say diction, words need to be appropriate for the context. Make sure that they are all connected. Number three, diction, words need to be understood by the readers or listeners, and that is diction. And the last one is when speaking, words need to be properly pronounced, and that is diction. Now, we have different types of diction. There are two types. The first one is the formal diction and the informal diction. The first one is the formal diction refers to the appropriate way of speaking for formal or official occasions. It often contains complex syntax and sophisticated words. Formal diction does not contain colloquialism, contractions, slang, and many others. So later we're going to define what is colloquialism, contractions, and slang. So remember, formal diction refers to appropriate way of speaking. This is more on formal. Next one. Informal or casual diction refers to the way of speaking we use in everyday life. Informal language does not usually contain any complex syntactic patterns or sophisticated terms. It might contain colloquialism and contractions. Unlike with formal diction, you're not allowed to use colloquialism, contractions, or slang, but in informal or casual dictions, you're allowed to use colloquialism and contractions. Let's see the difference between formal diction and informal diction. Let's start with the first one. When it comes in formal diction, we have to use "it is my opinion." When it comes in informal, you have to say "I think." For the formal diction, you have to use the word occupation. For informal, you have to say job. For formal diction, we have to use "please accept our apologies for." But in informal, you have to say sorry. For formal, you have to use to receive. For informal, you have to use to get. For formal diction, you have to use I'm writing to inform you. While in formal diction, you just have to say just a note to say. And those are the examples between formal and informal diction. Another example, as you can see here below, let's start with the formal diction. In formal diction, we have to use how do you do? But in informal, you have to use what's up? For formal, it's a pleasure to meet you. Goodbye. For informal, nice to meet you. See you. For formal, I'm afraid your child is experiencing difficulty. But in informal, your kid is making trouble. For formal, air consists of a variety of elements. But in informal, air has all kinds of stuff in it. Next one, for formal, it is not necessary for you to. But in informal, you don't have to. For formal diction, we have to use etymology is a fascinating subject of study. For informal diction, they're just going to use studying bugs is like really cool. For formal diction, we have to use one grows wary in these matters. For informal diction, we're using use I'm tired of this junk. Next example, I agree with my colleague that. For informal, you're just going to say Lily's right. And lastly, for formal diction, you have to use this sentence, please state your business. But in informal, you have to say what you do, what do you want. Now, let's define first colloquialism. Colloquialism is non-standard, which means that is not usually accepted or used by the educated speakers, and often original ways of using language. Colloquialism is more on using informal or casual diction. They are appropriate for informal and conversational speech and writing. Colloquialism is expressions like yup, guys, ain't gonna, y'all are example of colloquial words. And now, the slang. Slang is an informal, non-standard form of language which consists of newly creative and rapidly changing words and phrases. For example, words like fat, physically active, attractive. If you're mad, you just have to say bunkers. Instead of saying BMW, you're just going to use Beamer. So those are the example of slang. Another example, the word family. Instead of saying family, you just have to use fam. Instead of saying boyfriend or girlfriend, you have to say bay. Another example is instead of saying friendship between two males, you have to say bromance. And another one is two friends with constant disputes, we call it the frenemy. Also words like LOL or laugh out loud, TTYL or talk to you later, and IDK, I don't know, can be considered as slangs. Alright, so those are the examples of slang or as an informal or non-standard form of language. Now, the dialect. Dialect is a variety of language spoken in a particular geographical area or by a particular group of people. Dialect may be different from the standard variety of the language through its vocabulary, syntax, and pronunciation. This is a good example here in Philippines. We have different dialect. So our country has different dialects like Ilonggo, Bisaya, and those are the examples of dialect. Jargon. Jargon is a specific words or phrases used in different contexts, professions, and trades. The people outside that context may not be able to identify these words and phrases. Jargon can be used in professional contexts. For example, FTP is a police jargon for the failure to pay the fine. For the medical jargon for blood pressure, they use BP. That means jargon is a specific words or phrases used in different contexts or professions and trade. Those are the examples of medical jargon. For example, agonal, term to signify a major negative change, a patient's condition. BP, medical shorthand for blood pressure. FX, medical jargon meaning bone fracture. JT, a joint. NPO, a patient should not take anything by mouth. IM, intramuscular. K, the elemental symbol for potassium. Examples of police jargon. Suspect, a person whom the police think may have committed a crime. 10-4, radio jargon meaning okay or I understand. Code 8, term that means officer needs help immediately. Code 8. Alright, for code 11, a code that means the individual is at the scene or at the crime. FTP, the failure of an individual to pay a fine. And at the same time, assume room temperature. An individual has died. And now let's talk about figures of speech. When we say figure of speech, is a rhetorical device that achieves a special effect by using words in distinctive way. Always remember, a special effect by using words in distinctive way. Let's start with the first one. The first figure of speech we have here is the alliteration. When we say alliteration, is the repetition of initial consonant sound. So remember, alliteration, initial consonant sound, the repetition. As you can see, the example is she sells seashells by the seashore. It's the repetition of S sounds. Next, anaphora. When we say anaphora is the repetition of the same word or phrase at the beginning of successive clauses or verses. So remember, for anaphora, it's the repetition of the word. For example, unfortunately, I was in the wrong place at the wrong time at the wrong day. As you can see, the repetition of the word wrong from the sentence, and that is anaphora. Next, apostrophe. What is apostrophe? Directly addressing a non-existent person or an inanimate object as though it were a living being. Always remember, when it comes in apostrophe, is directly addressing a non-existent person. For example, oh, you stupid car! You never work when I need you to. Bird's eye. And that is example of apostrophe. Next, the word euphemism. When we say euphemism, is the substitution of an inoffensive term for one considered offensively explicit. For example of euphemism, always remember in euphemism is the word substitution for an inoffensive term. For example, we're teaching our toddler how to go potty. So they use the word potty, and that is euphemism. Next, hyperbole. When we say hyperbole, an extravagant statement, the use of exaggerated terms for the purpose of emphasis or heightened effect. Always remember, for hyperbole, this is more on exaggerated words. For example, I have a ton of things to do when I get home, and that's exaggeration. And now, what is irony? When we say irony, a statement or a situation where the meaning is contradicted by the appearance or representation of the idea. So always remember, in irony is this is more on contradicted by the appearance or representation. For example, a fire station burns down. That's an irony. A marriage counselor files for divorce. That's irony. The police station gets robbed. That's an irony also. Next one is metaphor. Metaphor is an implied comparison between two dissimilar things that have something in common. Or when we say metaphor, this is more on comparing two unlike things without using like or as. For example, he has a heart of gold. That is metaphor. Next one, metonymy. When we say metonymy is a figure of speech in a word or phrase is substituted for another with which it's closely associated. Also, the rhetorical strategy of describing something indirectly by referring to things around it. Always remember, when we say metonymy, this is more on substitution of the word. For example, the pen is mightier than the sword. Another example, instead of saying let me give you a help, you're just going to say let me give you a hand, and that is metonymy. Another figure of speech is, we call it the onomatopoeia. When we say onomatopoeia, is the use of words that imitate the sound associated with the objects or actions they refer to. When we say onomatopoeia, always remember the word sound, the sound word. For example, the clap of thunder went bang and scared my poor dog. As you can see in the sentence, the onomatopoeia there is the word bang. Oxymoron. Oxymoron is a combination of contradictory or incompatible words. That means in a sentence, you're just combining the positive and the negative words. For example of oxymoron, fate, unfaithful, kept him falsely true. As you can see, there is a synonym and antonyms for faith and unfaithful. Number 2, do you have the original copies that we requested? Another one, this is a genuine imitation Rolex watch. So synonyms and antonyms for genuine and imitation. Number 4, His new girlfriend really is pretty ugly. As you can see, the synonym and antonym is the pretty ugly, and that is oxymoron. Another example of figure of speech is personification. When we say personification is a figure of speech in which an inanimate object or abstraction is endowed with human qualities or abilities. Or simply, when we say personification is you are giving life to an object. For example, that kitchen knife will take a bite out of your hand if you don't handle it safely. That means you give life to an object, and that is kitchen knife. Next, simile. Simile is a stated comparison usually formed with like or as between two fundamentally dissimilar things that have certain qualities in common. Or simply, you're just comparing two things using like or as, and that is simile. For example, Roberto was white as a sheet after he walked out of the horror movie. In the sentence, he used as. That means that is simile. Next one, synecdoche. When we say synecdoche is a figure of speech in which a part is used to represent the whole. So remember, synecdoche is representing the whole. For example, Tina is learning her ABCs in preschool. Instead of saying alphabet or using alphabet in the sentence, you're just going to use ABC, and that is synecdoche. Another example, the phrase gray beard. When you say gray beard, refers to an old man. The word sails refers to the whole ship. The word suit refers to a businessman.
And that's it for today. I do hope that you learned a lot from our lesson. If there are some questions, feel free to send me a message. Once again, thank you and God bless.